Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter films only briefly touched on the story of his parents, Lily and James. On screen, we saw only the key moments: Lily's heroic self-sacrifice, her difficult relationship with Snape, and the overall sense of tragedy. But much more was left behind the scenes. Those who have read the books know James and Lily were vibrant, complex, fascinating individuals, and their life before their deaths deserves its own story. Today I'll show you facts that didn't make it into the films, but reveal a very different side of the Potters. Enjoy watching. Number 1. James and Lily were head boy and head girl. In their 7th year at Hogwarts, Lily Evans and James Potter were chosen as head girl and head boy. A great honour, not given to just anyone. Despite his reputation as a troublemaker, James had begun to change by then and showed responsibility, while Lily was always a model student. Hagrid later called them the best wizards of their time for a reason. The books emphasize how smart, capable, and respected Harry's parents were. The films, however, completely left this detail out. Number 2, they married right after school. James and Lily began dating during their final year at Hogwarts and got married soon after graduation. They were only 18 years old at the time. To a 21st century viewer, that may seem too young, but with the looming war against Voldemort and the instability of the time, it was a logical choice. Young witches and wizards didn't know what the next day would bring and treasured every moment together. This fact adds a deep layer of tragedy to their story. Two lovers just starting their lives, thrown onto the front lines far too soon. Number 3, they didn't have ordinary jobs. James's financial independence played a significant role in their lives. His family had considerable wealth, which allowed James and Lily not to seek traditional magical employment. Instead, they focused on what mattered most to them: fighting Voldemort. They were active members of the Order of the Phoenix and took part in operations against the Death Eaters. Interestingly, this privileged background stands in stark contrast to Harry's childhood, a boy who grew up in a cupboard under the stairs, knowing neither love nor comfort. Number 4. James saved Snape. Despite their years-long feud, James Potter once saved Severus Snape from certain death. When Sirius Black decided to prank Snape by sending him to the Shrieking Shack, where Lupin transformed into a werewolf during the full moon, James stopped him in time. Realizing how dangerous the joke was, he intervened and risked himself to save Severus. This act shows that James was far more than the arrogant bully he's often portrayed as. He had a strong sense of honor and justice, even toward his enemies. The films completely ignored this crucial moment. Number 5. They had a cat. In one of the few surviving notes Lily Potter left to Sirius Black, she mentions a cat, a family pet, who lived with them. Lily wrote that little Harry nearly knocked the poor creature over while flying through the house on his toy broomstick. What became of the cat after Voldemort's attack remains unknown. Fans have speculated wildly, including the theory that the cat later became Crookshanks, Hermione's pet. Though left out of the films, this detail adds warmth and humanity to the Potter family's image. Number 6. Lily's wand was willow, James's was mahogany. Like all young witches and wizards, James and Lily bought their wands from Mr. Ollivander. Lily's wand was 10¼ inches long, made of willow, a wood often chosen by those who've experienced great loss. It perfectly reflects her sensitive and compassionate nature. James's wand was 11 inches, pliable mahogany, ideal for transfiguration. As we know, James was an animagus, and that magical talent was reflected in his wand choice. Number 7. Lily had the ability to see the good in people. Lily Evans saw light where others saw shadows. When everyone else called Severus Snape strange, cruel, even dangerous, she called him her friend. For years, she defended him. When Gryffindors rolled their eyes when James Potter mocked him in front of the whole school, Lily still sat beside Snape in the library, still walked with him by the Black Lake. She believed he could change. She wanted him to choose better. Even after he called her mudblood, she hesitated. "I can't pretend it didn't matter," she said, her voice shaking. "But it wasn't just the word, it's everything you've chosen." Her faith in him didn't vanish in a single moment. It shattered slowly under the weight of dark choices, but she never hated him. Not once. Even years later, Snape carried her memory like a wound, because Lily saw the good in him, until he proved it, no longer wanted to be seen. Number 8. James and Lily's wedding was modest but meaningful. Their wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't held in a castle or beneath floating lanterns. It happened in a quiet corner of the countryside, surrounded by friends, fear, and love. War was raging, Death Eaters were rising, but James and Lily chose hope, chose each other. Sirius Black stood beside James, grinning like a brother. He later told Remus, "It was the last time I saw them truly happy." The ceremony was simple. No reporters, no enchanted fireworks, just the order, a few family members, and a vow spoken without fear. Lily wore soft green, her favorite color. James trembled when he took her hands. They laughed through their vows, their voices strong, even as the world outside cracked under Voldemort's shadow. It wasn't about glamour. It was about holding on to something real, when everything else could vanish in fire. Harry never saw a photo of that day. The only thing that remained was a memory passed through Sirius, a fragment in a letter Lily wrote, and the silence that followed their deaths. But those who were there remembered. They said it was a moment of peace, carved out of chaos, a moment where love, even for just one day, stood taller than war. Number 9. James and Lily escaped Voldemort 3 times. James and Lily didn't just defy Voldemort once, they did it 3 times. That's what made them dangerous in his eyes. Not just bold, not just brave, but lucky, elusive. He heard the prophecy, Dumbledore explained. He chose the boy born to those who had thrice defied him. Those 3 acts of defiance weren't small. They were life or death escapes from a wizard who rarely missed twice, let alone 3 times. The first time, they helped the Prewett brothers escape an ambush. Voldemort had sent Dolohov and Mulciber to kill them. James and Lily arrived first. Wands drawn. Shields up. The battle was brutal, but they got everyone out alive. The second time, they intercepted an attack on a Muggle village just as Death Eaters began their slaughter. Lily's protective magic held off 3 curses at once, while James stunned their leader from behind. The third time was the closest. Voldemort himself came for them during a mission in Derbyshire. No backup, no escape, just 2 wands against the Dark Lord. They fought him long enough to apparate out seconds before the killing curse hit. He never forgot it. 3 times they stood in his path. 3 times he failed to destroy them. That's when he turned to prophecy. That's when he marked their son. Number 10, Lily and James were among the first members of the Order of the Phoenix. Lily and James Potter weren't just parents, they were soldiers. Warriors in the First Great War against Voldemort. When the Order of the Phoenix was formed by Albus Dumbledore, they were among the youngest to join, but also among the fiercest. They stood beside Alastair Moody, Marlene McKinnon, and Frank and Alice Longbottom, the best of the best, names whispered with reverence and grief. They were in hiding more than once. They were hunted. Lily's name was on the Death Eaters' lists. James duelled with more than one of them in open battle. Sirius would later say, James wasn't just good with a wand, he was fearless. Together they broke up attacks on Muggle-born families, sabotaged Death Eater operations, and protected those too weak to fight back. They didn't wait for the war to reach them. They ran into it. In one mission, Lily reportedly saved an entire group of cursed children by casting protective enchantments that held against dark magic even St. Mungo's couldn't identify. And James, brash, brave James, once lured a group of Death Eaters away from a village by riding through the trees on his broomstick, casting spells in every direction until they were chasing only him. He barely escaped. They knew the risk. They didn't care. Their courage wasn't loud, but it was relentless. Dumbledore trusted them. The Order loved them. Voldemort feared them. And in the end, they didn't fall because they were weak. They fell because they were dangerous to him, because they fought, even when running would have been easier, because they believed in something greater than themselves. Number 11. James had the invisibility cloak long before Harry. Long before Harry ever unwrapped it on Christmas morning, the invisibility cloak belonged to James Potter. It was not a gift from Dumbledore, it was an heirloom passed down through generations of Potters. James wore it during his years at Hogwarts, sneaking through the castle's secret corridors, exploring forbidden towers and slipping past teachers unnoticed. Especially one teacher he loved to torment, Severus Snape. The cloak was no ordinary magical item. It was one of the Deathly Hallows, the very cloak of legend made not by wizard hands but by Death himself, according to the tale of the three brothers. It never wore out, never faded. James didn't know its full origin, but he knew it made him untouchable. "Your father left this in my possession before he died," Dumbledore later told Harry, "and I thought you might like it." That one sentence revealed a lifetime of hidden stories. With the cloak, James became a ghost in the night. Alongside Sirius and Peter, he wandered the grounds at will. They spied on Filch, escaped detentions, and, more than once, eavesdropped on staff meetings. It was more than mischief. For the Marauders, it was freedom, protection, a way to move unseen in a world full of threats, long before war officially broke into their lives. But the cloak didn't just hide James, it carried history. It linked him to ancient power, to destiny, even to his son's future. When Harry wore it years later, he wasn't just stepping into a magical disguise, he was stepping into his father's footsteps. The same cloak, the same defiance, the same heart that believed rules were flexible, but loyalty was not. Number 12. James was an animagus in secret from the teachers. James Potter was not just a gifted student, he was an unregistered animagus by the age of 15. Alongside Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew, he mastered a form of magic so advanced that even seasoned Aurors struggled with it. They kept it secret. No teacher at Hogwarts knew, not even Dumbledore. They did it for one reason only, to help their friend, Remus Lupin. Remus was a werewolf. Each full moon, his body broke apart and reformed into something wild, dangerous, and utterly alone. But James, Sirius, and Peter refused to leave him to suffer. "They became animagi to keep me company," Lupin later told Harry, his voice low and full of memory. "It took them 3 years. No one's ever done anything like that for me." James chose a stag, tall, strong, protective. The others called him Prongs. It wasn't just noble, it was dangerous. One mistake in the animagus process could leave a wizard permanently half-transformed. But James pulled it off. He learned to walk on 4 legs, to think like a beast, to run through the forbidden forest beneath the moon with Padfoot, Wormtail, and Moony. They called themselves the Marauders and even created the Marauders map, enchanted to track every soul in Hogwarts. It was a secret masterpiece of magic born out of friendship. In the books, the truth slips out quietly. Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. The map introduces itself with mischievous pride. James never told anyone outside their circle, not the professors, not even Lily at first. But behind the pranks and the laughs was something deeper, a boy who would learn the hardest magic not to show off, but to stand by his friend when it mattered most. Number 13. Lily was a natural-born witch despite her muggle-born status. Lily Evans didn't come from a magical family, but magic flowed through her like sunlight through glass. Even as a child, before she ever heard of Hogwarts, she could make a flower bloom with a touch or jump higher than gravity allowed. The first person to see this magic wasn't a teacher or a ministry official. It was Severus Snape, the lonely boy who watched her from across the playground and whispered, "You're a witch." She laughed. But then he showed her how to control it. And the moment he did, she understood. This wasn't just a trick. It was a part of her soul. At Hogwarts, Lily's talent didn't go unnoticed. Professor Slughorn quickly took her under his wing, praising her skill in potions and calling her one of the brightest he'd ever taught. Charms came to her like music, and even complex defensive spells, things some students struggled with for years, seemed to settle into her wand like they belonged there. Sirius Black once joked that Lily could have taught the class if Flitwick ever went on holiday. But no one laughed when she blocked a powerful hex in their 5th year that had left 2 older students in the hospital wing. She was never just good, she was brilliant. What made her brilliance extraordinary was that it came from inside, not from bloodlines. She was Muggle-born, daughter of 2 ordinary parents who never even owned a cauldron, and yet she mastered the same magic the Malfoys boasted about as their birthright. Even Snape, when cornered years later, couldn't deny it. "You don't understand," he told Dumbledore, his voice broken. "She was different. She was Lily." In a world poisoned by blood prejudice, she shattered the lie that only pure bloods held true power. The irony was cruel. Those who followed Voldemort saw Lily as impure. Yet her magic was the very thing they couldn't replicate, rooted in love, in integrity, in sacrifice. When she chose to die for Harry, it wasn't just a mother's instinct. It was the purest form of magic the Dark Lord had ever faced. Not power learned from books or passed through generations, but power born from courage, and courage, as Lily proved, needs no pedigree. Number 14. James left behind a wealthy inheritance. It was never truly addressed in the films, but those who wandered deeper into the pages of the books or ventured into J.K. Rowling's supplementary lore uncovered a fact far richer than Gringotts' deepest vaults. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, never lacked for money. From his very first visit to Diagon Alley when Hagrid opened Vault 687 to reveal piles of gold, to his years at Hogwarts buying sweets for his friends or funding Fred and George's business, the question lingered like an unanswered riddle. How did an orphan child come into such a fortune? The movies, wrapped in visual wizardry, never spoke of it, but the truth, hidden behind generations of wealth and a clever potion, is a story that began long before the Dark Lord ever marked Harry with a curse. James Potter, Harry's father, was not just a brave member of the Order of the Phoenix or a gifted Quidditch player. He was, in fact, the heir to one of the most prosperous wizarding families in Britain. His parents, Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, were not simply background characters faded into the past. They were part of a legacy built on ingenuity and luck. Fleamont, James's father, was the man who took the modest Potter family name and turned it into gold, literally. His invention, a potion humorously titled Sleekeasy's Hair Potion, revolutionized personal grooming in the wizarding world. The potion's success was no minor affair. With its slick branding and flawless results, Sleekeasy's became a staple on the shelves of apothecaries and vanity tables alike. Even Hermione Granger, known more for her intellect than for vanity, used the product to tame her famously unruly hair for the Yule Ball. It worked wonders, earning Fleamont not just acclaim, but a fortune that would outlast him. The Potter family, once comfortable, now swam in wealth. When Fleamont and Euphemia died, within days of each other from dragonpox, a fate cruel in its timing, all of their wealth passed to their only son, James. This wealth, though never flaunted, defined the quiet financial security James and Lily enjoyed. They had no need for ministry jobs, no pressure to earn a living. They lived in Godric's Hollow, not out of necessity, but out of choice, a village rich in magical history, where Bathilda Bagshot wrote her legendary A History of Magic. The home was modest, but the coffers behind it ran deep. Their time was spent fighting Voldemort, not earning wages, and when tragedy struck and they were taken too soon, that fortune was left untouched, waiting in the vaults of Gringotts for the son who would never know them. Harry had never seen so much money in his life, the book tells us in Philosopher's Stone, as he stared in awe at the contents of Vault 687. Gold galleons, silver sickles, and bronze cloots glittered under the torchlight. An inheritance, not just of coin, but of legacy. It wasn't Dumbledore or the ministry that paid for his school supplies, robes, or even Hedwig. It was the wealth of his parents and generations before them who ensured that Harry would never go without. The Potter family's fortune also had its roots in old blood. Long before Fleamont brewed his fortune, the Potters were a respected wizarding line. Descended from Linfred of Stinchcombe, a 12th century wizard and healer, the family had always shown a knack for potion making and invention. Linfred, known affectionately as the Potterer, is believed to have created several remedies that evolved into standard potions used at St. Mungo's today. His eccentricity and generosity earned him both a nickname and a substantial income, much of which he passed to his children. The Potters, it turns out, had been quietly accumulating wealth for centuries. The books make no spectacle of this. Rowling, in her subtle way, allowed the facts to remain hidden in plain sight. Harry never worried about money, even as he faced dragons and Death Eaters. When he impulsively gifted Fred and George his Triwizard winnings, 1,000 galleons, it was never framed as reckless, because for Harry, money was not a struggle. He had known true poverty with the Dursleys, but never again after stepping into the wizarding world. It's worth noting how unique this is in the series. Ron Weasley, his best friend, constantly battled the weight of poverty, wearing hand-me-down robes and patched-up shoes. His wand was second-hand, his self-esteem often brittle. The contrast with Harry's quiet affluence was never directly addressed, but it simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't just fate that treated them differently. It was legacy. James Potter left more than love and memories. He left a foundation. In the final battle for Hogwarts, Harry used no magical relic to summon wealth, no incantation to conjure comfort. But throughout the series, he had the means to support himself and others. He bought the fastest broom on the market, the firebolt, not because someone gifted it to him, but because Sirius Black, another heir of a wealthy family, had the means to do so. Wealth in the wizarding world passed quietly through bloodlines, from vault to vault, never truly spoken of aloud but always present. James Potter's wealth also symbolized a kind of freedom. He was able to devote himself to the Order of the Phoenix full-time. He didn't need to work at the ministry or teach at Hogwarts. He spent his days in rebellion, not routine, alongside Lily, who had once been a brilliant student and could have pursued any path she wished. Their focus was survival, defiance, and parenting. In another world, one where Voldemort never rose, perhaps James would have opened his own apothecary, honouring his father's legacy. But instead, his wealth became Harry's shield. What the films failed to show, they compensated for in imagery. Harry wandering through Diagon Alley without a care, buying books, robes, and pets, always confident he had the means. But they left out the most important layer, the story of where that security came from. It wasn't luck, it was love, ingenuity, and hard-earned success. Fleamont didn't fight dragons, but he did bottle confidence, pride, and style in a single potion, and he changed his family's destiny in the process. Number 15, Lily was highly skilled in potion making, long before she became known as Harry Potter's mother, long before her name was whispered with reverence and sorrow in the halls of Hogwarts. Lily Evans stood out in her own right, not just for her kindness or her muggle-born brilliance, or even the way her laughter brought light into shadowed spaces, but for a talent so precise, so quietly exceptional, that even the sharpest minds in the wizarding world took note. Potions, the most delicate and difficult of magical disciplines, was where Lily Evans shone with a brilliance rarely seen, even among the most gifted witches and wizards. The films, in their limited span of time and scope, painted Lily with broad strokes, a brave mother, a member of the Order, a woman who died for love. But the books, with J.K. Rowling's subtle threads of detail, offer a deeper portrait, one in which Lily's intelligence, especially in potion-making, is undeniable. And in those small, carefully placed mentions, we discover that she was not just good at potions, she was extraordinary. One of the most telling testaments to Lily's skill lies in the respect she earned from Severus Snape. This is not a man who gave praise freely. Snape, the brooding, bitter potions master of Hogwarts, spent most of his adult life hiding wounds from the past, letting bitterness fester into cruelty. Yet even in his darkest hours, he never dismissed Lily's brilliance in their shared art. From the moment they met as children in Cokeworth, Lily's curiosity about magic and her intuitive understanding of it impressed Severus deeply. He saw in her a mind as quick as his own, perhaps even quicker. Lily and Severus spent hours together exploring magic before they ever set foot in Hogwarts. Their shared fascination with potions became a bond, a secret language in which ingredients were promises and cauldrons whispered secrets. Severus taught her what he knew, but she wasn't merely a student. She was a partner. He would later, in whispers no one else heard, admit to having taken her suggestions seriously when working on his own experimental brews. She had a knack for seeing what others missed, he once muttered to a colleague, though the context was lost to time. In The Half-Blood Prince, we see how critical Snape was of others' attempts at potion-making. He tore into students for the slightest mismeasurement, the tiniest deviation, and yet in his youth, when he was still just a boy scribbling in the margins of advanced potion-making, he shared ideas with Lily. That alone speaks volumes. He trusted her. Perhaps he even needed her perspective. It is difficult to imagine Severus Snape, even at 11, handing over notes or debating formula modifications with anyone but someone whose brilliance mirrored his own. Horace Slughorn, the famed potions professor, ran what he fondly called the Slug Club, a collection of students he deemed to have talent, influence, or both. Lily Evans was one of his prized members. It wasn't just because she was pretty or kind or clever. It was because she was sharp, capable, and poised to do great things. Slughorn spoke of her with genuine admiration. One of the brightest I ever taught. And that was no faint praise, coming from a man who had taught the likes of Tom Riddle and Merlin, knows how many future ministers. In Slughorn's memories, we see a Lily who held her own in conversation, who questioned things with grace and precision, and who could challenge others without ever sounding confrontational. She didn't boast about her knowledge, she simply let her work speak for itself, and her potions spoke eloquently. In a classroom where students routinely exploded cauldrons or brewed sickly sludge, Lily's concoctions came out clear, stable, and more effective than even the instructions required. Potions is a subject of subtlety and patience. Unlike charms or transfiguration, which rely on wandwork and incantations, potion-making is both science and art. It demands a steady hand, a methodical mind, and a creative spirit. The textbook tells you to stir clockwise 7 times. But what if counterclockwise on the 8th makes it stronger? Most students wouldn't even try. Lily did. She had the instinct of a potioneer, not just to follow, but to refine, to innovate. During their 5th year, when the curriculum introduced more complex brews, such as the draught of peace and the elixir to induce euphoria, Lily excelled beyond expectations. Her elixirs didn't merely pass inspection, they impressed. There are whispered accounts from classmates, buried deep in fan recollections and notes, that Lily's calming draughts were so effective they were used unofficially during exam season by a few nervous Ravenclaws. "You know," one student once wrote in a letter, "I think Lily could have replaced Slughorn if she'd lived long enough." What makes Lily's mastery even more impressive is the environment in which she excelled. Hogwarts, for all its magic, was still an institution with biases. Muggleborns were often overlooked or subtly undermined, especially in more technical magical fields. Yet Lily not only kept up, she surpassed expectations. She didn't just match the abilities of her pure-blood peers, she redefined what professors thought a Muggle-born witch could achieve in the most intricate branches of magic. There's a poignant irony in the fact that her son, Harry, inherited none of her talent for potions. While his mother's instincts might have lived on in other ways, his natural reflexes in Quidditch, his instinctive loyalty, his defiant bravery, potions was a struggle. Snape, of course, didn't make it easier. But perhaps, in some cruel corner of his heart, every time Harry botched a brew, Snape was reminded that Lily was gone, and that the one person he had once admired for her clarity of thought and subtle genius was no longer there to share the joy of their craft. Number 17, Lily knew how to forgive, but not betrayal. Of all the powerful and overlooked truths in the Harry Potter universe, few carry as much emotional weight and moral clarity as the story of Lily Evans and Severus Snape. It is a story that never found its full expression in the films, but in the books it echoes with the quiet devastation of lost friendship and irrevocable choices. Lily, whose legacy is often tied only to her sacrificial love, was also a young woman of principle, warm, forgiving and kind, but not a fool. Her capacity for mercy had its limits, and when that line was crossed, even Lily Evans, the girl who saw good in nearly everyone, knew how and when to walk away. Lily and Severus had known each other since childhood. Their friendship began before Hogwarts, growing out of a shared sense of not quite belonging. He was the strange boy from Spinner's End. She was the muggle born with unexplained powers. In each other they found understanding, curiosity, and loyalty. But as the years passed and the house divisions at Hogwarts intensified, so too did the forces that would ultimately pull them apart. Lily's values and Severus's choices began to clash. And though she forgave much, his surliness, his dark interests, even his cruel friends, there was a limit, and that limit was betrayal. The moment that changed everything came during their 5th year at Hogwarts. Severus had been humiliated by James Potter in front of a crowd. In his rage and shame, he lashed out not at James, but at Lily, who had come to his defense. "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her," he shouted. The words fell like a stone in a still pond. That single slur, mudblood, carried a poison that no apology could dilute. It wasn't just an insult, it was a revelation. Lily realized that Severus had absorbed the very prejudices he had claimed to reject. But what stung more than the word itself was what followed. Severus apologized, yes, but his actions betrayed his words. He didn't distance himself from the friends who believed in blood purity. On the contrary, he grew closer to them. Avery, Mulciber, and others, young Death Eaters in training, remained his circle. Mulciber had even tried to use dark magic on Mary MacDonald, a fellow student and one of Lily's friends. Lily confronted Snape about this, telling him plainly that she couldn't understand how he could be friends with people like that. Snape's answer, evasive, defensive, only deepened the wound. This moment, recorded in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, was no minor rift. It was the culmination of years of slow divergence. Lily was not judgmental by nature. She had shown compassion to everyone from unpopular classmates to misunderstood peers. But she drew a line where moral compromise began. She did not expect perfection, but she expected goodness, and when Severus showed he was willing to associate with those who practiced cruelty, bigotry, and dark arts, she recognized that he was no longer the boy she once trusted. In The Prince's Tale, when Severus revisits these memories through his own mind, the pain is still fresh. He did not just lose a friend, he lost the only person who ever truly accepted him before he became the bitter shell of a man he later embodied. But Lily's decision to end their friendship was not a cruel act, it was necessary. Forgiveness does not mean tolerance of evil. She forgave Severus for his faults, but not for joining a movement that sought to destroy her kind. The tragedy is deepened by the fact that Lily still hoped he might change. Before their final break, she gave him chance after chance to distance himself from the dark arts and his growing allegiance to Lord Voldemort's ideology. Her kindness was not blind. She was observant, wise beyond her years. She saw what Severus was becoming and warned him. But he chose power over principle, vengeance over love. And Lily, with a heart as kind as it was strong, let him go. The films condensed this into a tragic montage, giving viewers only the outline of their friendship. But the books tell a richer, sadder, and more instructive story. It is a story not just about two people, but about the choices that define who we become. Lily's choice to cut ties with Severus was an act of moral clarity. She was not vindictive. She simply refused to compromise her values for the sake of a friendship that had turned into a quiet threat. There is a lesson here, often overlooked in discussions about forgiveness. Lily's character shows us that being merciful doesn't mean being naive. She understood that kindness must be rooted in truth. If someone you love aligns themselves with hatred, even if they love you in return, that love becomes a dangerous contradiction. Forgiveness can be a private balm, but trust, once broken, cannot always be mended. It's easy to romanticize Severus Snape. He loved Lily deeply and for life. But love alone does not absolve a person. In one of the most powerful lines in the series, Dumbledore says to Snape, "How you disgust me." This comes after Snape shows more concern for Lily's death than for the deaths of her husband and child. It's a stark reminder that obsession is not the same as goodness. Snape's love, however real, was warped by the darkness he chose to embrace. Lily, on the other hand, loved freely but wisely. Her relationships with friends like Mary, Marlene McKinnon, and eventually James were built on shared values. She didn't chase danger or drama. She was fiercely intelligent, socially aware, and principled. Even her choice to marry James Potter, once an arrogant boy, was not impulsive. James had changed, matured, and proved himself worthy. Lily saw that. And unlike Snape, James never tried to drag her into darkness. Number 18. James Potter trusted Sirius Black until the very end. It was one of the most devastating betrayals in wizarding history, and yet the films brushed past it with the gentleness of a ghost. To most casual fans, Sirius Black is the wrongly accused godfather, Peter Pettigrew is the treacherous rat, and James and Lily Potter are the doomed couple whose love protected their son. But beneath the surface of that tragic tale lies a deeper, sharper truth, a truth of trust, of brotherhood, of a choice that sealed their fate. James Potter trusted Sirius Black with everything he had, including the lives of his wife and child. In the films, the audience is not allowed to feel the full weight of this trust. We see flashes of friendship, scattered moments of camaraderie, but nothing substantial enough to understand the depth of what was lost. What the screen omits, the books whisper. James and Sirius were not merely friends. They were more than that. They were family, not by blood, but by choice, forged in the crucible of youth and rebellion. The Marauders were a tight-knit band of mischief-makers, but James and Sirius stood closest, their bond unshaken, even when the world began to fracture. When the Potters went into hiding, the threat was very real. Voldemort had targeted them personally. The prophecy had been heard. Death Eaters prowled the streets. The Order of the Phoenix was under siege. The Fidelius charm was the most powerful protection available. It concealed a location so thoroughly that only the secret keeper could reveal it. The obvious choice for the role was Sirius. Not only was he James's best friend, but he was also one of the few people they believed they could trust absolutely. And that's the point that matters. James never questioned Sirius, not once, not even when Sirius himself insisted that they choose someone else. The night the Potters decided to change their secret keeper from Sirius to Peter Pettigrew was not a night of suspicion, it was a night of strategy. Sirius was too obvious, he argued. If Voldemort suspected anyone, it would be him. His proximity to the Potters made him an immediate target. But Peter, nervous, overlooked, weak Peter, would never be suspected. He would be safe. That was the logic. That was the deadly miscalculation. What the films failed to show is that Sirius volunteered the idea. "I convinced James to use Pettigrew as secret keeper instead of me," he confesses in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. "I thought it was the perfect plan, a bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me, would never dream they'd use a weak, talentless thing like Pettigrew." That sentence alone carries the weight of 1,000 regrets, but behind that regret is the unspoken truth. James trusted Sirius's judgment completely. He didn't second-guess him, he didn't hesitate. When Sirius showed up at Godric's Hollow that Halloween night, finding the house in ruins, he didn't question what had happened. He knew. His first thought wasn't denial, it was realization. He went straight after Pettigrew, not to confirm his suspicions, but to destroy the man he now understood had betrayed them. His rage was not born from shock, but from grief. He had given Peter their secret. He had given Peter James's life. In those early hours after the murder, Sirius broke. The wizarding world never got to see that. The films never showed it. But in the books it's clear. The laughter in the street, the one that caused the auras to think he had gone mad, that was not joy. It was agony. It was the kind of laughter that only comes when grief hollows a man out and leaves nothing behind but a dark echo of what he used to be. James and Sirius were inseparable from their very first days at Hogwarts. The Sorting Hat placed them both in Gryffindor, though Sirius came from a long line of Slytherins. That act of rebellion alone marked the beginning of a new life for him. James became his anchor, the brother he chose. During holidays, when Sirius refused to return to the Black family home, it was the Potters who welcomed him. In fact, Sirius left his family for good at 16 and moved in with James's parents. He wasn't just a friend, he was a son of the house. They lived, laughed, and fought like brothers. They created the Marauders' map, roamed the castle grounds as animagi, and stood shoulder to shoulder against the rising darkness of Voldemort's forces. So when it came time to choose someone to protect his wife and son, James didn't weigh his options. He didn't consult Dumbledore. He didn't hesitate. He chose Sirius because to James Potter, Sirius Black was unbreakable, and yet Sirius knew that was his weakness. "Voldemort would expect me," he said. So he offered up Peter, thinking himself clever, thinking he could outmaneuver the Dark Lord. He underestimated the cowardice of Pettigrew and overestimated the safety of shadows. When Peter betrayed them, the price was blood. Lily and James died that night, murdered by a man who should never have found them. But James didn't die doubting his friend. He died believing Sirius had done everything he could. There is no record of suspicion, no hesitation, not a single word in any of the books or notes from the Order suggesting James had lost faith in him. On the contrary, he remained convinced until his last breath that Sirius was on his side. The true tragedy is that James died never knowing he had been betrayed by Peter. He died still thinking their plan had worked. It was a clean death, unpoisoned by betrayal, but only because he trusted the wrong person for the right reason. Sirius, meanwhile, carried that burden for 12 years in Azkaban. Not just the betrayal, not just the murder, but the knowledge that it had been his idea, his switch, his plan, and that's why he never defended himself. He could have pleaded with the ministry, he could have begged for a trial, but he didn't. He accepted his punishment, because in his mind, he had failed James. The films reduce this to a convenient narrative twist. Sirius was never the traitor, Peter was. The mystery is solved, the audience cheers, and the plot moves on. But in the books, the weight of this decision lingers. It defines Sirius. It explains his wild desperation when he escapes Azkaban. It justifies his reckless attempts to protect Harry, to become the godfather he promised James he would be. The trust James had in Sirius was not a flaw. It was his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. He loved deeply. He believed in loyalty, and he believed that love would protect his family. He wasn't wrong. Love did protect Harry, but it didn't save James. There's a quiet moment in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Sirius tells Harry, "You're not your father, you know." And yet, in so many ways Harry is. He carries that same unshakable loyalty, that same fierce love for those closest to him, that same refusal to believe the worst in his friends. Just like his father, Harry is betrayed by someone he once trusted. Just like James, he learns that faith can be fatal. What the films gloss over is the depth of the Marauders' tragedy. Not just that one of them turned traitor, but that another tried to stop it and failed. That James died trusting Sirius, and Sirius lived on doubting himself. That Peter wasn't just a villain, he was the weakest link in a chain built on love. James's trust in Sirius was absolute. That is the fact the films did not give its due. Not a single scene depicts the raw, emotional weight of that relationship. Not a single line acknowledges that Sirius had once been the first, the only, the irreplaceable choice. We know that when Sirius finally sees Harry in person, he calls him James. That slip is more than nostalgia, it's trauma, it's loss. It's the shadow of a man who trusted him and paid the price. It's the memory of a brother he couldn't save. When Harry later names his own son James Sirius Potter, the gesture is not just sentimental, it's redemptive. It's a healing of a wound that never truly closed. It's a resurrection of the bond that Voldemort tried to sever. James and Sirius, reunited in name, in legacy, and in love. The films gave us magic, they gave us spectacle, but they couldn't give us this. The ache of trust unbroken, the mistake that cost lives, and the unwavering belief of a man who never stopped trusting his brother until the very end. Number 19. Lily wrote letters to Sirius, and one of them survived. Buried deep within the dust and darkness of number 12, grim old place among the relics of a family that prided itself on blood purity and tradition, was something no one expected to find, the voice of Lily Potter. Not her ghost, not her portrait, but something far rarer, her words written in ink, preserved on parchment, unaltered by time. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry stumbles upon a letter in Sirius Black's old room, a letter his mother had written to Sirius when he was just a baby. It was a sliver of warmth tucked into the cold heart of a place filled with secrets and sorrow. The films never showed this moment, but in the book, it stands as one of the most emotionally resonant discoveries Harry makes. It is not just a letter, it is her voice. J.K. Rowling writes this scene with deliberate tenderness. It happens in Chapter 10 of the final book. Harry, Hermione, and Ron are searching for clues in Sirius's ancestral home, now serving as their temporary base. While scouring Sirius's old bedroom, Harry finds a piece of paper with handwriting he somehow recognizes as his mother's, though he had never seen it before. It was a letter, Rowling writes, and it was addressed to Sirius. There's an almost painful intimacy in this moment. For the first time, Harry is not hearing about Lily and James from someone else. He is hearing from Lily herself. The letter is not long. It is not epic or dramatic. But it is, perhaps, the most human glimpse into the life of Harry's parents that we ever get. Lily talks about their little boy, about his first birthday, about the toy broomstick that Sirius gave him. She thanks Sirius, who was clearly a constant presence in their lives despite the lurking threat of Voldemort. "Dear Padfoot," she begins, using Sirius's affectionate marauder nickname. The letter immediately grounds the reader in a world that could have been safe and happy. She continues, thank you for Harry's birthday present. It was his favourite by far. He is flying around the garden now. He only fell off it once, and it wasn't very high." These are the details of motherhood, not of war. These are the details Harry never knew he'd missed until he read them. Harry's hands tremble as he holds the letter. The power of that moment does not come from spells or legends or horcruxes. It comes from silence, broken by a mother's love. For once, Voldemort is not in the picture. For once, there is no prophecy, no war, no danger. There is only Lily writing to a dear friend about the everyday joy of watching her baby play. It is a heartbreaking reminder of everything that was stolen, not only from Harry, but from everyone who loved her and James. The fact that this letter is the only surviving piece of Lily's handwriting Harry ever sees is almost too painful to bear. The scene becomes even more powerful because of its setting. The room is a mausoleum of a life Sirius abandoned when he was 16. The Black family tapestries are gone, torn from the walls. There is a poster of a Muggle motorbike, the very one Sirius rode. There is graffiti scrawled on the walls, defying the dark values of the house. And there, amidst the defiance and decay, lies this fragile slip of paper, a testament to a bond that even death couldn't sever. In the letter, Lily also mentions their fear. "Wormy was here last weekend. I thought he seemed down, but that was probably the news about the McKinnons." The name stings, knowing what we now know about Peter Pettigrew. Even then, Lily was unknowingly sharing her home with the man who would betray her. This single piece of parchment does more than convey affection. It serves as a narrative bridge to the past. It confirms that Sirius was not just James's best friend, he was part of their family. He He gave toys, visited often, helped them feel connected even while in hiding. The letter gives weight to what Dumbledore had said for years, that Harry's parents were loved and not alone. In the films, we never get to see this side of Sirius, not as the doting godfather before Azkaban, but as the man who brought joy to a little boy in the middle of a war. The letter gives that vision life. Most tragically, the letter is incomplete. Torn in half, it leaves Harry with only a glimpse of what Lily was trying to say. The second page is missing, and with it, perhaps, answers Harry never knew he sought. What else did she write? Did she talk about James, about her fears, about the world collapsing around them? We'll never know. But it's the mystery that makes it all the more poignant. Harry folds the letter as carefully as though it might shatter in his hands. It is all he has of her, and it is not enough. Rowling's decision to include this moment in the book and exclude it from the films was likely a matter of pacing, but for readers it remains one of the quietest, most devastating moments of the series. In a story that spans continents, timelines, and prophecies, this letter reminds us that at its heart, Harry Potter is about love, love that leaves echoes, even in abandoned houses and torn pages. The letter proves that Lily was not a distant, ethereal figure. She was a young mother, delighted by her son's laughter and grateful for the support of her friends. There is something uniquely magical about hearing from someone who is gone, not through memory, but through their own words. The handwriting, the choice of words, the rhythm of sentences, it all brings Lily to life in a way nothing else could. James is getting a bit frustrated. Shut up here, she writes. He tries not to show it, but I can tell. In just that one sentence, James becomes more than the brave, idealized figure Harry had constructed. He becomes human, a man feeling restless and worried, just like anyone else. The letter allows both parents to step out of the fog of legend and into the warmth of real life. When Harry reads the letter, he is not just reconnecting with the past. He is encountering a part of himself that he never knew existed. He hears the voice of the woman who died to save him, not in screams or spells, but in simple, everyday language. There is no tragedy in the letter, only life. And that is what makes it so tragic. It is the life they never got to finish. It is the life Harry never got to remember. The absence of this letter from the film adaptation is deeply felt. For all the visual splendor and emotional weight the movies carry, this quiet scene could have been one of the most intimate glimpses into Harry's heart. It is not an action scene, not a revelation of a grand twist, but it is the kind of moment that would linger long after the credits rolled. A candle lit in a dark hallway, a voice calling from the past. The letter also complicates our understanding of Sirius. We often see him through the lens of trauma, broken, impulsive, loyal to a fault. But this letter shows him as he was before Azkaban, beloved, trusted, involved. Lily didn't just thank him for a gift. She knew him well. She counted on him. In just a few lines, Sirius becomes more than Harry's godfather. He becomes the kind of friend every parent hopes their child will one day have. Someone who makes life feel normal even in abnormal times. The irony is sharp. The letter survived, but the house where it was written did not. The friendship survived in memory, but the people are gone. Lily's words to Sirius were never meant for Harry, but in reading them he receives a form of inheritance far more personal than a vault of gold or a magic cloak. He inherits her voice. He inherits a piece of her love. Later in the book, as Harry walks toward death in the Forbidden Forest, we see how deeply this connection has affected him. He does not need to shout her name to feel her presence. He has heard her, in her letter, in her love. It is not Dumbledore or Hagrid or even Sirius who gives Harry the quiet strength in those final moments. It is Lily. It is the woman who once laughed watching him fly a toy broom around a garden. That memory, though second-hand, becomes his own. Even in the world of magic, there is no spell to resurrect a letter. The fact that this one survived amid chaos, betrayal, death feels like a miracle. It is not enchanted, it is not glowing or humming, but it is perhaps the most powerful object Harry finds in that house. It holds no incantations, but it casts the most potent charm of all, remembrance. Not the enchanted kind, the real kind. And so the films move past Grimmauld Place without letting us pause long enough to see it. The house becomes a location, not a memory palace. The walls whisper no names. But in the book, Rowling gave us something cinema could never fully capture. The intimacy of reading a mother's words, as her son does line by line, breath by breath. It is slow magic, the kind that takes root and lingers. In the end, the letter is not just for Harry, it is for the reader. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things are the most ordinary. A broomstick, a birthday, a note to a friend. It is a whisper in a world full of shouting, a candle in the dark, and it burns still. Number 20, James loved Quidditch and was the team captain. Harry Potter's love for Quidditch is one of the most memorable and celebrated aspects of his character. From the moment he soared into the sky on a Nimbus 2000 in the Philosopher's Stone, fans were captivated by his natural skill, courage, and fierce determination. But what many forget or never knew is that this passion didn't begin with Harry. Long before he flew across the Hogwarts pitch, broomstick gripped tight and eyes locked on the snitch, there was another Potter who ruled the skies. James Potter, his father. Not only was James a phenomenal Quidditch player, he was the captain of the Gryffindor team, a fact left out of the films but deeply significant in the books. James Potter's legacy on the Quidditch pitch is mentioned only briefly in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, hidden within a chapter where Sirius shares old photographs and stories of the Marauders. Among the cluttered corners of number 12, Grimmauld Place, Sirius reveals to Harry a photo of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, dating back to 1977. There, in vivid description, stands James, beaming with pride, broom in hand, and messy hair whipping about in the wind. It's in this brief, nostalgic moment that we glimpse a side of James that's more than just mischief and defiance. He was a leader, an athlete, and a symbol of courage for his house. James was not merely a player on the team, he was its beating heart. As captain, he didn't just call plays or organize practices, he inspired. He was the type of player that made others believe they could win even when the odds were stacked against them. Professor McGonagall, herself a former Quidditch player and a fiercely loyal Gryffindor, spoke of James with an uncharacteristic softness when she mentioned his time on the team. "Your father would have been proud," she told Harry after his first match, her voice tinged with memory. She had seen James fly just as she had now seen Harry. The books make it clear that James played as a chaser, although early materials and some fan theories have speculated that he might have been a seeker. This confusion, likely stemming from the films, is part of why the depth of James's Quidditch career often goes unnoticed. However, J.K. Rowling herself confirmed in various interviews and on the now archived version of her official website that James was in fact a chaser, not a seeker. The distinction is crucial, not just technically, but symbolically. Chasers are the lifeblood of the game, the strategists, the ones who keep the score moving. James's role was not to swoop in at the end and claim victory, but to carry the team on his back throughout the entire match. The image of James weaving between bludgers and beaters, quaffle tucked under his arm, paints a very different picture from the mischief maker of the Marauders map. This was James at his most focused. Quidditch wasn't a prank or a game to him, it was a passion, a battlefield where he could channel all that fiery Gryffindor energy into something greater than himself, and as captain he brought that fire to everyone else. His teammates, likely including young players like Frank Longbottom, would have trained under James's direction, learned from his skill, and believed in victory because he did. What's even more compelling is how this legacy passed down to Harry, not just genetically, but spiritually. When Harry took to the skies in his first year, it was as if the past returned in physical form. Oliver Wood, then captain of the team, remarked on Harry's incredible talent. "He's just like his father. Wood told Professor McGonagall in The Philosopher's Stone. "Plays just like him. I couldn't believe it when I saw him fly." These were not idle words. Oliver was speaking to something deeper, an inheritance not of objects but of instinct and soul. It's telling that the broom Harry first receives is a Nimbus 2000, a cutting-edge broom at the time, gifted not by his professors but by Professor McGonagall, who saw in him not just potential but legacy. And later, when Sirius gifts Harry his own prized broom, the Firebolt, he doesn't just give him a tool, he gives him a symbol. That broom represents a direct connection between Harry and the world James once ruled. "This is from Sirius," Ron whispers as they gaze at the Firebolt in The Prisoner of Azkaban. It's more than a broomstick, it's a torch being passed. The way Harry flies is more than skill, it's poetry. In The Philosopher's Stone, when Harry dives after the Remembrall, it's not calculated, it's instinctual, just like James. Both father and son moved not with mechanics but with grace. They became one with their brooms like hawks in the air. When Harry dodges a bludger, loops around a post, and catches the snitch inches from the ground, it's James's blood singing in his veins. In one of the most emotional moments in the Deathly Hallows, Harry visits the grave of his parents. The inscription reads, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." But James's true immortality isn't only in those words, it's in every match Harry plays, every dive he takes, and every win he claims. James is alive in the applause that echoes across the stands, in the wind against Harry's face, and in the fire that fuels his love for the game. The films, for all their brilliance, chose not to explore this layer. James's Quidditch legacy is absent. We see echoes of his mischief, his friendship with Sirius, and his defiance against Voldemort, but not his passion for the game. And this omission, while perhaps understandable for cinematic economy, robs viewers of an essential part of who James was, not just the rebel, but the captain, not just the husband and father, but the hero of the pitch. One can only imagine the younger James, 15 or 16, rallying his team before a match against Slytherin, the bitter rivalry, the pressure to perform, the house points on the line, all of it channeled into his voice as he looked each teammate in the eye and said, "We fight for Gryffindor, we fly to win." That's the James Potter who existed beyond the shadows of memory. There's something beautifully symmetrical in the way both Potters took the sky with the same kind of reckless joy. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry forms Dumbledore's army, he channels that same leadership. He becomes, in effect, a captain, not of a Quidditch team, but of a resistance. That confidence, that unshakable belief that they could succeed if they stood together, echoes James's spirit. Harry's courage didn't come from textbooks, it came from something born in the air, passed down like wind in the bloodline. Quidditch is not merely a sport in the wizarding world, it's a rite of passage, a crucible of courage, and a theatre of identity. That's why James's role as captain matters so much. It wasn't just that he was good at Quidditch, it was that Quidditch revealed who he was, a fighter, a leader, and a protector. It was on the pitch that he honed the instincts he would later use to defy Voldemort 3 times before dying for his son. Even Harry's most famous match against Draco Malfoy and the Slytherins has shades of his father's battles. The house rivalries, the fierce competition, the demand for precision and bravery, they are all echoes of a legacy that James helped build, and Harry carries it forward with every match, often without realizing it. We are reminded again and again that Harry feels closest to his father in the air. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, during his lessons with Lupin, he conjures a Patronus that takes the form of a stag, the same form as James's animagus. The connection is visceral. Harry doesn't just see his father, he becomes him. The stag leaping through the mist is not a ghost but a memory reawakened. It's no coincidence that Harry's happiest memory, the one that fuels his Patronus, is one where he is flying. And yet James's role as captain remains one of the most underappreciated aspects of his character. He wasn't just part of Gryffindor's history, he helped shape it. He led by example, brought pride to his house, and inspired players to push beyond their limits. His presence on the field was legendary enough to be remembered decades later, not just by McGonagall, but likely by many who watched him play. When Harry eventually becomes captain himself in The Half-Blood Prince, there is a beautiful, unspoken full-circle moment. Though the book never spells it out, readers who know the history feel the weight of that inheritance. Harry is not just following in James's footsteps, he is continuing his story, from captain to captain, broom to broom, courage to courage. In the wizarding world, brooms are enchanted, but the real magic lies in the people who ride them. James Potter, soaring across the pitch in scarlet robes, shouting encouragement to his team, was more than a teenage boy with talent. He was the soul of Gryffindor on wings, and Harry, flying in his father's shadow and eventually surpassing it, shows us that some legacies are too powerful to fade. The sky remembers, the wind remembers, and though the films may have forgotten to tell this part of James's story, the books do not, nor do the fans. Because every time Harry mounts a broomstick and chases the snitch with fire in his eyes, we are reminded of the captain who came before him, the one who flew not just for glory, but for love, for house, and for the future of a son who would one day fly just the same. Number 21, Lily stood up for the oppressed. There is a quiet fire that lives between the lines of Lily Evans's story, a truth so vivid in the books yet so absent from the films that it leaves a gap in the heart of her legacy. For all the praise that surrounds Lily as Harry Potter's mother, the brave woman whose sacrifice saved the boy who lived, there is a deeper layer to her character that deserves its place in the light. Lily was not just loving. She was not merely talented, she was a protector, fierce and uncompromising, of those the world found convenient to overlook. From the earliest glimpses of her time at Hogwarts, Lily's empathy was not just a feeling but an action. She didn't wait for someone else to speak up. In a school sharply divided by blood status and house rivalries, she stood up again and again for students who had no one else on their side. Her strength lay not in spells alone, but in the choices she made when cruelty reared its head in plain sight. One of the most telling moments in her school years, often glanced over but crucial in understanding her soul, was her consistent defiance of the Slytherin's bullying tactics. Severus Snape, long before becoming the divided man of later years, watched this unfold with both awe and conflict. Lily confronted those who harassed Muggle-born students like herself, not with fear, but with a calm yet sharp resistance. She called out the whispers, the curses muttered under breath, the hexes thrown in the corridors. She never adopted the easy silence others hid behind. In their 5th year, when James Potter arrogantly humiliated Snape in front of the school by hoisting him upside down with a flick of his wand, a scene immortalized in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Lily didn't hesitate to intervene. "Leave him alone," she shouted, stepping between the smug Gryffindor and the helpless Slytherin. The books don't paint her as soft-spoken or hesitant here. She was direct, furious, protective, and it wasn't because she had any romantic feelings for Snape. By then, their friendship was beginning to unravel. It was because Lily Evans had a moral compass that didn't waver based on who was popular or who was easy to defend. This same confrontation with James became a pivotal turning point, not only in Lily's friendship with Severus, but also in her complex feelings about justice. When Snape later called her a mudblood, the very slur she had defended others from, she didn't offer him forgiveness. She walked away not with hatred, but with sorrow. Even after years of friendship, Lily would not excuse cruelty. Her kindness had boundaries, and her values were not negotiable. It's no wonder Professor Slughorn held such admiration for her. When he described Lily to Harry, his tone was not casual or perfunctory. She had a natural flair for potions, he said. But more than that, one of the brightest I ever taught. Vivacious, charming girl. But it wasn't just her intelligence or charm that earned his praise. Lily treated even professors with respect born of integrity, not pretense. Slughorn, who often collected talented students for his own benefit, had genuinely liked Lily. She saw through flattery but never returned it with arrogance. She reminded the adults around her of what principled youth looked like. Even among her friends, Lily was the ethical backbone. She was known to have had arguments with her fellow Gryffindors when they acted out, not with self-righteous anger, but with a passionate defense of fairness. When Marlene McKinnon was teased for her opinions about the war growing outside Hogwarts walls, Lily stood with her. When Mary MacDonald was targeted by Slytherin boys for being outspoken and Muggle-born, it was Lily who hexed the aggressor's robes into flames. A spell done swiftly, without hesitation, followed by a firm report to Professor McGonagall. What made her remarkable was that Lily was never performative in her actions. She didn't protect people to gain favor or build an image. Her bravery was deeply private. Her decisions weren't fueled by revenge or impulse. They came from a lived truth. She knew what it felt like to be diminished, to be dismissed. And she had vowed, silently and powerfully, not to allow others to be treated the same way if she could help it. There is a quiet moment in Snape's memory, one that even Harry, upon witnessing it in The Prince's Tale, couldn't ignore. Lily is arguing with Severus, her former friend, about the people he now keeps company with. "You call everyone of my birth mudblood, Severus. Why should I be any different?" It's not a dramatic line, it's said with weary honesty. She is tired, she has been kind, patient, and forgiving, but not endlessly. Her compassion has limits, and when that line is crossed, she walks away. That is strength. That is conviction. Her influence lingered even beyond her school years. Though the books offer little detail about her life between graduation and the birth of Harry, what we do know carries echoes of the same spirit. She and James joined the Order of the Phoenix, not for glory, but to resist Voldemort's ideology, an ideology that thrived on blood purity, fear, and domination. Lily, born Muggle-born and proud, stood on the front lines of that ideological war, not only as a fighter, but as a symbol, one who disproved the lies of the Death Eaters with her very existence. When Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow on that final night, he didn't have to kill Lily. She was given a choice. Step aside and live. Let him take the child, and she could survive. But Lily said no, not out of maternal instinct alone, though that was undoubtedly present. Her final act was the ultimate embodiment of the values she had lived by all along. She would not let the innocent be slaughtered. She would not abandon someone who had no means to protect themselves, even if it meant her own death. Dumbledore, speaking of Lily, described her protection as the kind of magic Voldemort never understood. It wasn't just love, it was sacrificial love, yes, but rooted in years of action, of living a life where standing up for others was second nature. The magic didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a life consistently chosen in the direction of courage and justice. That is the Lily we never fully see in the films, the one whose compassion had steel in it, the one who could make even the headstrong James Potter question his own behavior. The one whose respect had to be earned and once lost could not be begged back with apologies. The one who didn't just love her son, but whose entire life was built on the same choice she made in her final breath, to protect the vulnerable. The tragedy of her story is not only in her death, but in how little of her was truly known to the generations that came after. Harry sees glimpses in Snape's memories, in Sirius's stories, in the way McGonagall's voice softens at the mention of her name. But the woman herself, her laughter, her fire, her unwavering moral clarity, that is lost to time, unless we choose to remember. Hermione once said, "Books and cleverness, there are more important things, friendship and bravery." Lily Evans was the proof of that long before those words were spoken. She lived by them. She didn't just speak of ideals. She lived them in the choices no one saw, in the silences where others looked away, and in the moments when standing alone was the only right thing to do. We often say that Harry inherited his mother's eyes, but he inherited much more. He inherited her courage, her loyalty to friends, her willingness to fight even when it hurt. That is the true legacy of Lily Evans, not just the mother who died to save her son, but the girl who lived to protect the voiceless. The halls of Hogwarts remember her not through portraits or grand commemorations, but in the stories whispered by professors and the quiet inspiration that lives in students like Neville Longbottom, who found strength despite fear. In Luna Lovegood, who stood firm in her strangeness. In Hermione, who fought with both intelligence and conviction. Whether they knew it or not, they walked through doors that Lily had opened. The films gave us a silhouette, a tender voice, a few fleeting memories, but the books gave us a woman with a lion's heart, a woman whose actions, even in youth, cast a shadow longer than any spell. To read her story is to understand that the greatest kind of bravery is the kind done quietly, when no one is watching, with no expectation of applause. And in that way, Lily Evans was more than a mother, more than a gifted student. She was a beacon, a protector, a quiet revolutionary in school robes and windswept hair, walking through the castle with fire in her gaze and kindness in her hand, never afraid to draw her wand, never afraid to stand alone, and never once willing to let injustice pass unchallenged. Number 22. James changed for Lily. It's easy to dismiss James Potter as a charming troublemaker if your only window into the wizarding world is the Harry Potter films. He appears briefly, a smiling father figure in fleeting flashbacks, or else mentioned as a bully in the lips of a bitter Snape. There is little time devoted to explaining who James Potter truly was, not the boy in the corridors of Hogwarts, but the man who would one day walk into war, lay down his wand to shield his wife and child, and die on his feet. Yet in the books, Rowling left us a far more complicated portrait. James was not born noble, he became noble, and that transformation, often ignored on screen, is one of the most powerful and human arcs in the entire saga. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry glimpses a memory that shatters his perception of his father. He sees 15-year-old James hexing Severus Snape for nothing more than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. James lounges like a king under a tree, playing with the snitch, full of himself, and with Sirius egging him on. He is cruel, smug, and worst of all, entitled. It's a moment that leaves Harry shaken. "My dad didn't strut," he says to Sirius later, but Sirius only laughs and says, "Your father was the best friend I ever had, and he was a great person, but he was as arrogant as you like." That arrogance was not simply teenage mischief, it was weaponized confidence, the kind that comes easily to someone born with wealth, talent, and popularity. James Potter had it all, and he was a star chaser, clever in class, beloved by his friends, and descended from an ancient wizarding family. But he wielded that privilege carelessly. He bullied Severus, mocked authority, and showed little regard for the consequences of his actions. And yet Lily Evans, brilliant, independent, principled Lily, would one day choose him. The films never told us how that came to be. The books, however, give us the answer. James changed. We must take a closer look at how Rowling laid the foundation for James's growth, particularly in Deathly Hallows, when Aberforth Dumbledore refers to the younger generation fighting in the Order of the Phoenix. "Some were as young as your lot," he says. "Your father, for instance, never stopped believing it was right to fight, fought till his last breath." There, in a single sentence, we glimpse the kind of man James became. One who stood not in the safety of his name, but in the shadow of death. The turning point lies between the lines, in what Lily tolerated and what she didn't. In Snape's memory, when Lily defends Snape against James, she is furious. "You think you're funny," she snaps at James, "but you're just an arrogant, bullying toe-rag." It is clear she finds James's behavior repulsive, not charming, and more importantly, she refuses to consider him until he matures. Rowling later confirmed in interviews that James stopped hexing people, began to grow up, and only then did Lily start to see him differently. In other words, Lily didn't change her standards. James rose to meet them. It's no coincidence that we hear of this change through Remus Lupin in Order of the Phoenix. When Harry confronts Sirius and Remus about James's bullying behavior, Remus replies, "James grew out of it. He stopped hexing people just for the fun of it, even Snape. And though the two adults try to laugh off the incident, there is shame in their recollection. These were not proud moments, but the key phrase is there. James grew out of it. That growth, though subtle in the text, is vital to understanding why Lily fell in love with him. The time after Hogwarts was critical. James joined the Order of the Phoenix immediately after graduation. He faced Voldemort's Death Eaters not in the safe comfort of rebellion, but in mortal danger. He and Lily were named as targets. They lived in hiding. They witnessed horrors. In that crucible, whatever remained of the cocky boy evaporated. What emerged was a man ready to die for a cause, for his wife, for his son. We know from Sirius that James and Lily defied Voldemort 3 times. This is not the action of someone playing hero. It is the repeated defiance of a man who chose principle over safety. And while Lily had always been brave, standing up to friends, challenging injustice, earning her place in the Order, James had to learn to channel his courage into something bigger than himself. The fact that Lily chose to love him, to marry him, and to have a child with him speaks to the magnitude of that transformation. Consider what Dumbledore says about James in Philosopher's Stone. When Harry receives the invisibility cloak, Dumbledore writes, "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you." This wasn't just a magical artifact. It was a symbol of James's maturity. The cloak, a deathly hallow, was passed from a man who had accepted death to a son who would one day face the same choice. James's journey is bookended by the cloak, first as a prankster's toy at Hogwarts, later as a legacy of sacrifice. Even Snape, bitter and unforgiving, gives us an unwitting glimpse of James's character shift. In The Prince's Tale, when Snape tells Dumbledore that he had begged Voldemort to spare Lily, Dumbledore is unmoved. He knows that Snape's remorse is real, but he also knows that James's love was the one that protected Harry. "He has her eyes," Dumbledore says again and again, not as a comfort to Snape, but as a reminder that it was Lily and James together who made that protection possible. Snape alone did not save Harry. It was James's willingness to die without a wand in his hand that sealed the spell. The irony is rich. James, who once disarmed Severus just to show off, ended up disarmed in death, not because he was weak, but because he thought first of his son. There was no duel, no final boast, just a man standing between his family and evil. That is not the boy who hung Severus upside down in the air. That is a father, one who learned the hard way that real strength is quiet and real love is sacrifice. One of the most painful absences in the films is the lack of depth in Lily and James's relationship. We never see the quiet moments, the laughter, the trust, the shared resolve. But in the books we understand that Lily loved James not despite who he was, but because of who he became. She didn't fall for the Quidditch star. She fell for the man who grew into her equal. In many ways, James mirrors Harry's own journey. Harry, too, is a boy who could have become arrogant, given his fame. But he chooses humility, not because he is naturally modest, but because he knows the price of arrogance. He knows what his parents gave up. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry sees James in the Priori Incantatem Echo, he hears his father's voice, firm, protective, full of love. That James, the one who tells Harry, "Your mother's coming, you'll be all right, hold on," is not a bully. He is the culmination of a long, silent evolution. That is why Harry, naming his son James, is more than a gesture. It is a reclamation. It is Harry saying, "I understand now that the man his father became was not perfect, but was brave, loving, and worthy." In naming his son James, Sirius Potter, Harry honors not the prankster but the protector, not the boy who strutted but the man who stood. In one of Rowling's interviews, she admitted that James's arc is one of her favorites precisely because it is quiet. Growth does not always come with fanfare. It comes in choices, in what you stop doing, in how you behave when no one is watching. James chose to become the kind of man Lily could love, and that choice cost him his life. but it also gave his son the strength to defeat Voldemort. And this is the great tragedy of the films. They forgot that redemption is earned, not implied. They left James as a sketch, charming, dead, handsome. They didn't show the long hours in the Order, the fear in hiding, the resolve in battle. They didn't show how a boy who mocked others grew into a man who stood alone, wandless, to give his son a chance at life. James Potter's story is not just one of love, but of transformation. His change wasn't instant, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't done for fame. It was done for a girl who once called him an arrogant toe-rag, and later chose to share a home, a cause, and a destiny with him. He became the man Lily deserved, and that is the story worth remembering. Number 23. Lily had a difficult relationship with her sister. Few things in Lily Evans' life were as quietly painful as her relationship with her only sister, Petunia. Though often overlooked in cinematic retellings of the story, this bond, strained, cracked, and ultimately broken, formed a central emotional thread in the background of Lily's life, defining not just her own capacity for love and forgiveness, but also echoing painfully in the childhood of her son, Harry Potter. Unlike the quick glimpse of bitterness shown in the movies, the books offer a more nuanced and haunting account of how envy, rejection, and unreturned affection shaped both women. It all began in the quiet town of Cokeworth, long before wands and spells and prophecy entered the picture. Lily was still a little girl when her magical abilities first bloomed, and they didn't pass unnoticed. Petunia Dursley, older, prim, and painfully ordinary, had always wanted to believe she was special. But as the world whispered secrets to Lily, the way flowers opened to her touch and leaves shimmered in strange colors when she was near, it became increasingly clear to Petunia that it was her sister who had been chosen for something more. The jealousy that took root then was not the loud, obvious kind. It was slow, poisonous, and fiercely guarded. Lily's kindness was as natural as her magic. When she met Severus Snape at the playground near Spinner's End, her life changed forever, but so did Petunia's. Lily had finally found someone who could name the strange things she could do. Petunia watched from the outside as the world began to shape itself around Lily in ways it never would for her. The moment the letter from Hogwarts arrived with its creamy parchment and emerald ink was the moment Petunia began to harden into something colder than mere resentment. She wrote a letter to Dumbledore herself, begging to be let into the magical world. The answer she received was a polite refusal. It was the final confirmation that she was not and never would be part of Lily's world. From that moment on, the divide widened. Lily was ecstatic, brimming with excitement about the magical school, the friends she would make, the future she couldn't wait to explore. Petunia, in contrast, grew distant and cruel. She began to mock Lily's magic, calling her a freak. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Snape recalls a memory where Petunia shrieks, "Freak! Freak! That's what you are!" Words that would one day be echoed by Petunia's own son, Dudley. Lily had never stopped trying, though. She had looked at her sister with pleading eyes, willing her to understand, to accept, to love. But Petunia had already locked that door. At Hogwarts, Lily bloomed. She became beloved not just for her intelligence and bravery, but for her unwavering empathy. She stood up for others, even when it hurt her. Her falling out with Severus Snape, who once called her a mudblood in a fit of anger, devastated her. But even then she showed him more grace than most would have. That same grace extended toward her sister. Despite the years of cold shoulders and sharp words, Lily never turned her back on Petunia. When Lily married James Potter, Petunia didn't attend the wedding. She claimed she was busy, claimed it was foolishness. But the truth was, the divide between them had deepened into a canyon. Petunia couldn't bear to stand beside a sister who shone so brightly in a world she would never understand. She chose Vernon Dursley instead, a man as far removed from magic as a human could be, and sealed herself inside a reality where magic didn't exist, where Lily was just a forgotten part of a childish dream. But Lily never forgot her sister. When Harry was born, she wrote to Petunia telling her about her newborn son, expressing hope that they might reconnect, that her sister might want to be part of his life. In the Order of the Phoenix, a letter from Dumbledore to Petunia is briefly mentioned, reminding her of what was written in the letter I left with Harry when I delivered him to your care. That letter was not just a message from a headmaster, it was Lily's last desperate plea. A plea to protect her child, a plea from a sister who still believed, despite everything, that there was love buried deep in Petunia's heart. But the truth is cruel. When Lily died, murdered by Voldemort while shielding her baby with her own body, Petunia's response was not sorrow, it was duty. She took Harry in not out of love, but because she had been magically compelled to. Dumbledore's enchantment, based on Lily's blood sacrifice, forced Petunia to offer shelter. That enchantment kept Harry safe, but it could never make Petunia love him. He was the living proof of everything she had lost, everything she had never been. She resented him for his eyes, which looked exactly like Lily's, for the way he reminded her of the sister she had rejected. The cupboard under the stairs became his home, the cold shoulder became his daily bread. And yet Lily's hope had not been in vain. Somewhere in that sealed heart, a crack existed. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore gently reminds Harry, "She may have taken you grudgingly, furiously, unwillingly, bitterly, yet still she took you." That act, though wrapped in bitterness, was still an act of protection, perhaps not of love, but of something flickering and unspoken, the last link between sisters, stretched to breaking but never quite snapped. The tragedy of Lily and Petunia lies not in a single betrayal, but in a slow unraveling. Lily never returned Petunia's cruelty. Even when scorned, she hoped. Even when mocked, she smiled. Her kindness was not blind, it was chosen. She knew who Petunia was, what she had become. But she remembered the girl who once watched her pick petals with wonder. She remembered the sister who once held her hand on the walk home from school. There's a brief moment in The Philosopher's Stone, right before Harry boards the train to Hogwarts, when Petunia's eyes flicker with something like fear. It's the moment when she realizes that he is leaving for the world Lily belonged to, the world she was never allowed to enter. The wound reopens, but she says nothing. The absence of this rich emotional backstory in the films is a quiet loss. A few lines of disdain, a cold glance, those cannot capture the aching complexity of what Lily felt for her sister. Nor do they show the legacy it left in Harry, who inherited both the burden of magic and the ache of being unwanted. The books let us see the silent echoes of Lily's heartbreak in the way Harry longed for family, longed for understanding, even from those who had only ever hurt him. Even Petunia's final moment in the series, cut from the film adaptations, is quietly telling. In a deleted scene from the Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling had written a short farewell where Petunia almost reaches out to Harry. "You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know," she says. "I lost a sister." The line never made it to the screen, but it lingers in the mind. It was a whisper of regret, a hint that the years had taken their toll even on the proud, bitter woman who had once slammed the door on magic. Lily's story is not just one of bravery and sacrifice, it is one of endurance. Her forgiveness, never reciprocated, speaks volumes about her strength. It is easy to die for love. It is harder to keep loving those who have shut you out. Lily did both. She gave her life for her son, and she kept giving her heart to a sister who never gave hers back. The emotional architecture of the books reveals this pain subtly but powerfully. Rowling never paints Petunia as a villain, but as a woman deeply wounded by rejection. The tragedy is mutual. Lily's magic made her different. Petunia's lack of it made her feel abandoned. But only one of them tried to bridge that distance. Only one kept writing letters. Only one kept hoping. There's something haunting in knowing that Lily died, thinking her sister might one day love her child. She died believing in the goodness of a bond that had long since frayed. That belief, unanswered but never withdrawn, is the purest reflection of who she was. And it casts a long shadow over the entire series. We see its echo in Harry, who, despite everything, never once expressed hatred toward his aunt. He longed for a mother, and somewhere deep down he hoped Petunia might become something close to that. But she never did. And Lily's love, though powerful enough to protect her son from death, could not mend the wound between sisters. The story of Lily and Petunia is a silent tragedy, told between lines, hidden in memories, hinted at in letters never answered. It is a tale of what happens when love is offered and refused, when kindness meets envy, when a door is closed and someone still knocks. Perhaps Petunia cried alone in the quiet of night. Perhaps she kept the letter Lily wrote and read it once a year. We'll never know. The books leave it unsaid. But we are left with the truth that Lily Evans, bright and brave, carried her love for her sister until the end. And that, more than spells or prophecy, is what truly made her magical. Number 24. Lily could have been sorted into Slytherin. When Lily Evans boarded the Hogwarts Express for the very first time, she was 11 years old and burning with quiet magic. Her green eyes sparkled with wonder, and the air around her shimmered faintly with the kind of energy that comes only from those born to wield the impossible. Petunia, watching from the platform with tight lips and folded arms, never forgot the way the wind pulled at Lily's cloak as the train began to move. But the girl who would one day become the mother of the boy who lived had already stepped onto a path that would shape the fate of the entire magical world. Inside the train, her first encounter with Severus Snape set a tone that defined more than just a friendship. It revealed something deeper, an alignment of minds that went beyond the superficial. Severus was a boy of shadows, secrets, and sharp intellect, and Lily, though warm, kind, and full of light, was drawn to his depth, his knowledge, his promise of a world within the world. It wasn't just a childhood bond, it was a mirror. Their minds reflected each other in a way no one else could understand. When the train arrived and the first years were led into the great hall, Lily stood beneath the floating candles in wide-eyed awe, just like every muggle born before her. But unlike most, she wasn't nervous. There was a confidence in her, a silent strength, as if she already knew that wherever she was placed, she would not merely survive, she would thrive. The sorting hat was placed on her head, and it paused. It paused longer than it did for most. "You have the talent," the hat mused in that ancient voice that rang inside the skull. "Ambition, sharp mind, a drive to prove yourself. You would do well in Slytherin." This moment was never captured in the films, nor did it ever make its way into classroom gossip. But the sorting hat suggestion was real. The possibility of Lily Evans, the brilliant, beloved Gryffindor, wearing the green and silver of Slytherin House, was very real. It hesitated long enough to consider what that might look like. Lily among the cunning, the ambitious, the strategically powerful. Lily among those who would rise to power, for better or worse. But Lily, with a flicker of awareness far beyond her years, nudged the sorting hat in a different direction. Whether it was a whisper of "not Slytherin" or simply an unspoken desire, she shaped her path right then and there. The hat, respecting the choice, shifted its decision. "Better be Gryffindor," it announced, and Lily walked toward her new house with confidence, not regret. Yet the moment stayed with her for years, quietly tucked away like an unopened letter. There was no shame in the suggestion. Slytherin House is often misunderstood, reduced in public opinion to a nest of dark ambitions and pure-blood arrogance. But its core values, resourcefulness, determination, leadership, and cunning, are not inherently dark. And Lily, bright as she was, embodied them all, She was not just kind, she was purposeful. She was not only brave, she was strategic. Her excellence in potions, for instance, was no accident. Professor Slughorn, himself a proud Slytherin, recognized her talent immediately. "One of the brightest I ever taught," he would later say with wistful admiration. Lily's analytical mind and natural curiosity made her a star in his class, and her ability to combine discipline with creativity was precisely the kind of brilliance Slytherins admire. She did not simply follow instructions, she questioned, refined, improved. In another life, perhaps, Lily and Severus would have walked the dungeon halls together, brewing spells that the world hadn't seen in centuries. They might have become partners in magical innovation, bound by intellect and the strange beauty of shared ambition. But Lily chose Gryffindor, and with that choice she chose a different kind of strength. It's easy to assume that people fall into their houses like water into cups, but Hogwarts never worked that way. The hat considers choices, tendencies, and desires, not just traits. Lily had traits of both Gryffindor and Slytherin. She had the courage to stand against injustice, yes, but also the ambition to change her world on her own terms. She had the empathy of a hero and the drive of a revolutionary. This complexity became clearer during her 5th year, when the infamous incident by the lake occurred. James Potter, Sirius Black, and the others tormented Severus in front of the whole school. Lily stepped in, not just with bravery, but with moral clarity. She did not fear ridicule, nor did she concern herself with James's popularity. She acted decisively, even if it meant challenging the most powerful students in her house. That wasn't just Gryffindor fire, Gryffindor. That was Slytherin steel, the will to act when it mattered, regardless of cost. And when she turned away from Severus after he called her the unforgivable name, Mudblood, it wasn't a gesture of anger alone, it was a stand for dignity. She had spent years defending him, protecting him, urging him toward better choices. But even friendship has limits, and Lily's values were carved from something firmer than nostalgia. She could have overlooked it. Others did, but she didn't. She demanded respect, not just for herself, but for every other Muggle-born girl who would walk the same halls after her. Later, as the war began to burn brighter in the background of everyday life, Lily didn't hesitate to join the Order of the Phoenix. She knew what it meant, she knew what it could cost, but she joined anyway. Not because she wanted glory, but because she believed in doing what was right, another trait shared between the lion and the serpent. Her marriage to James might seem like a departure from everything Slytherin stood for. He was wild, reckless, arrogant in youth, but she saw something in him that others missed, the potential for growth, for change, for leadership. That too is a Slytherin insight, the ability to see the thread of power in someone else and pull it into something greater. James did change. He matured. He became the man she believed he could be, not out of pressure, but because she expected more from him. And he rose to meet that expectation. Their home in Godric's Hollow became a symbol of resistance, a quiet fortress filled with love and purpose. When Voldemort came, it wasn't because they were weak, it was because they were dangerous to him. Lily's protection of Harry was not an act of impulse, it was rooted in understanding. She knew the magic, she knew what her death could mean. Her final choice was a calculated sacrifice, not a blind rush. Dumbledore recognized this rare depth in her. She was a woman of deep understanding, he said, and great power. He did not refer only to spells or charms, he meant moral power, vision, the capacity to make choices that shaped the course of history. She stood at the center of a web of possibilities, and every decision she made moved the world. The films reduced her to a flash of red hair and a scream in the dark. But the books whisper more. They hint at the girl who could have been cunning, powerful, political, and chose instead to be good, to be brave, to be loud in a world that preferred quiet obedience. The Sorting Hat's hesitation wasn't a mistake, it was a recognition of what could have been. What makes this fact so powerful isn't that she was almost in Slytherin, it's that she could have excelled there. She would have redefined what it meant to be a Slytherin. Imagine Lily in green and silver robes, standing beside Andromeda Black, defying pure-blood ideology from within. Imagine her leading change, not from the outside, but from the heart of the system. She would have been formidable, but she chose Gryffindor, and that choice didn't limit her, it expanded her. She brought her intellect, ambition, and complexity into a house often misunderstood as the domain of brawn and bravado. She proved that being a lion didn't mean abandoning cunning. It meant sharpening it for justice. In her, Gryffindor gained more than a brilliant student. It gained a legend. The question then becomes, how many others did the Sorting Hat hesitate over? How many complex, multifaceted students shaped their destiny not by who they were, but by who they chose to become? Lily's story reminds us that identity at Hogwarts isn't fixed. It's fluid, evolving, forged in the fires of choice. We look back now, decades later, at the ruins of a war she didn't live to see end. Her son grew into the kind of boy she would have been proud of, not because he was perfect, but because he, too, chose courage over fear, love over vengeance. And in him, we see the echo of that moment in the Great Hall, when a young girl with flaming hair and a steady heart told the world without saying a word that she would define herself. Lily Evans could have been a Slytherin, but she wasn't. And in that decision lies not a rejection, but a revelation. The house did not make her great. She made herself great. Number 25. James helped Muggle-born students. The Marauder's map never showed the full truth about James Potter. To the average Hogwarts student, he was the laughing storm in the Gryffindor common room, a boy with unkempt hair, Quidditch robes permanently askew, and a wand always half raised in some mischief. Teachers called him brilliant, but insufferable. Slytherins whispered worse. And yes, for much of his school life, James Potter wore arrogance like a second skin. But the war, the true war, began before the first Death Eater mask was ever donned. And when that war took hold, James became something else entirely, a man who put his life, his home, and his name on the line for those the world cast aside. After Hogwarts, when many purebloods retreated into the cold safety of ancestral homes, James and Lily Potter did the opposite. They opened the doors of their cottage in Godric's Hollow not just to friends, but to fugitives, at a time when the Ministry of Magic was infiltrated and corrupted. When the Daily Prophet printed the names of the missing like morning announcements, the Potters became a sanctuary for the hunted, and those hunted were often the same kind of young witches and wizards who once passed unnoticed through Hogwarts corridors, the Muggle-borns. James had no reason to endanger himself for them. The Potter family was ancient, wealthy, and firmly entrenched in pure-blood society. If anything, he could have ridden out the chaos in comfort, claiming neutrality like so many others did. But he never considered that an option. For James, justice wasn't political, it was personal. Caradoc Dearborn, a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, once spoke of a time he arrived at the Potters' home, bloodied and shaken, carrying a barely conscious girl named Elizabeth Covington. She had been ambushed in Diagon Alley, a Muggle-born fresh out of Hogwarts, working in Flourish and Blots. They had tried to brand her. James took one look at her, carried her to the upstairs bedroom himself, and didn't sleep for 2 days. It wasn't the first time he'd done this, and it wouldn't be the last. The house in Godric's Hollow became more than a home. It was a revolving door for refugees. James, along with Lily, created false identities using enchantments learned from Dumbledore himself. One Muggle-born boy, Isaac Helling, who had watched his father murdered for refusing to renounce his non-magical heritage, stayed with them for 4 months under the name Elias Fenwick. James taught him defensive spells by moonlight, never once treating him as anything less than a brother. And yet none of this made it into the films. The movies gave us glimpses: the brave father, the defiant mother, the family that died to protect their child. But the rest, the crucial truth, was lost. perhaps because it didn't fit into a neat runtime, or perhaps because James's early arrogance overshadowed his redemption in the eyes of scriptwriters. But redemption was never the right word. This wasn't a man trying to cleanse his past. It was a man acting from belief, long before he had anything to prove. Even Sirius Black, the most jaded of the marauders, acknowledged this change. "In Order of the Phoenix," he told Harry, "your father would have done the same for anyone." It was more than sentiment, it was fact. The Death Eaters kept lists, and James Potter's name was high on every one of them, not for wealth, not for blood, but for betrayal. He had betrayed the expectations of his kind. The irony was sharp. The boy born into privilege fought harder for the oppressed than many who suffered firsthand, and James never broadcast it. He didn't write to the prophet, he didn't join protests or pose for photographs, he simply acted. He and Lily both, in silent defiance, took in children like Ophelia Twig, a 15-year-old whose family had been obliterated in a fire blamed on electrical faults, and the usual Muggle excuse when Death Eaters wiped out a home. During these months, James became an expert at concealment charms, not just the Fidelius, which would later guard their own lives, but simpler protections, memory modifications, warding spells, and emergency portkey protocols. He kept a map on the back of an old Quidditch poster, updated with red dots every time someone vanished. The dots never stopped multiplying. And still, he fought. As a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, he battled alongside Moody, Marlene McKinnon, and Benji Fenwick. But while others focused on frontal attacks, James had a second mission: extraction. He specialized in getting people out, whether from cursed houses, ambushed shops, or broken families. He smuggled a half-dozen Muggleborns across the Scottish Highlands in a single night using a charmed carriage disguised as a funeral cart. The Ministry never knew, nor did they care to. There was a night, just months before Harry's birth, when the Potters harboured a young woman named Clémence Duval, a French witch who had been tortured for marrying a Muggle. Her screams still haunted Lily. James sat by her bed every morning, offering pumpkin juice, stories about Hogwarts, and warm socks enchanted to sing lullabies. He didn't think twice about her blood status. He thought only of her pain. In school, James was quick to hex anyone who crossed him. But in war, he became a different kind of defender, precise, quiet, deliberate. He never once turned away a knock on his door. It was as if the boy who once played the hero on the Quidditch field now understood the true meaning of bravery. And it wasn't in the spotlight, it was in the shadows, standing between evil and the invisible. Even Snape, whose hatred of James was legendary, would later admit in Deathly Hallows, he was a brave man. That bravery went beyond standing against Voldemort. It meant standing for those Voldemort wanted erased. And unlike many in the Order, James didn't fight because he had lost someone. He fought so that others wouldn't have to. A lesser-known letter discovered in the Potter archives, dated August 1979, contains Lily's handwriting. "James is out again. Another Muggle-born boy from Lancashire. He won't say his name, just cries when he hears Latin. I fear he's seen too much. James swears he'll stay up with him tonight." The boy never spoke again, but he survived. James made sure of it. When Bathilda Bagshot was asked why she never wrote about James's post-Hogwarts work in A History of Magic, she replied, "Because people prefer to read about war heroes, not war healers." But in truth, the two were one. James wielded his wand like a sword when needed, yes. But more often, it was a shield. The tragedy of James Potter's legacy is that it was frozen in the moment of his death, murdered alongside his wife, protecting his son. An image burned into magical memory. But there was a time before that night, a time when he chose to make his home a fortress, his family a sanctuary, and his life a lifeline. And this choice, this relentless defiance of bloodlines and expectations, is what made him more than a good wizard. It made him a great man. The story of James Potter is not just about the father who died to protect the boy who lived. It's about the man who lived to protect the ones nobody saw. He may not have had a prophecy written about him, but to the nameless and hunted, James was no less legendary. He left behind no memoirs, no interviews, only memories, scattered among the survivors, whispered in the kitchens of old magical families, and held in the hearts of the Muggle-borns who, thanks to him, had a chance to keep living their magic. In the end, James Potter's wand fought 2 wars, one for survival, the other for dignity. And if history overlooked that second war, those he saved did not. They remembered the boy with messy hair who opened his door when everyone else closed theirs. They remembered his laugh, his rage at injustice, and his willingness to die for people whose names he barely knew. And perhaps most importantly, they remembered that he chose them not because he had to, but because it was right. Number 26. Lily knew the unforgivable curses, but refused to use them. The battlefield outside Godric's Hollow was quiet that night, but the echoes of war lingered in the hearts of those who fought in the shadows. Among them stood Lily Evans Potter, a name that would one day be spoken with reverence and awe, not just because of her sacrifice, but because of what she refused to become. In the blood-soaked war against Voldemort and his Death Eaters, she had power, knowledge, and opportunity. And yet she never once cast an unforgivable curse, not even when it would have been easier, not even when it would have been justified. This omission, this quiet moral rebellion, was never addressed in the films. But in the books and in the deeper canon surrounding Lily's life, it becomes clear that she was not only a skilled witch, but also a deeply principled one. She had studied the darkest arts not to use them, but to understand them. Her intelligence was legendary even at Hogwarts. Slughorn had called her one of the brightest I ever taught, and he wasn't prone to empty praise. She knew how the Cruciatus curse operated, how it tore through the nervous system and shattered a mind. She understood the mechanical precision behind Imperius and the grim finality of Avada Kedavra. But she never allowed herself to cross that line. There were moments, dozens of them, when she could have. The first was during the summer raids of 1979, when she and James had joined Marlene McKinnon on a mission to rescue a family tortured by Death Eaters in Bristol. They arrived too late to save the father, but Lily found the mother still alive, her eyes vacant and mouth trembling. When Dolohov appeared from the shadows, wand raised and smiling, James shouted for Lily to stay back, but she didn't. She stepped forward, wand ready, her eyes locked on the man who had just murdered an innocent child. The curse trembled on her lips, the syllables of Avada forming in her mind like instinct. But she didn't speak them. Instead, she cast a complex binding spell that immobilized Dolohov without taking his life. It was riskier. It gave him the chance to break free. But it was human. Members of the Order of the Phoenix noticed this about her early on. It wasn't that she was weak. Far from it. Lily's spellwork was meticulous and devastating when necessary, but she never allowed anger to become the conductor of her magic. It was Remus Lupin who once told Dumbledore in confidence that Lily was the only one among us who fights as though she's trying to save the enemy's soul. And that wasn't just poetry, it was strategy. She believed that fighting evil without becoming it was the only way the light could truly win. Her restraint was never more evident than in the final months before Harry's birth, when Voldemort had declared open war on any wizard family opposing his rise. The Prewett brothers had been killed, Gideon and Fabian. Their mutilated bodies were found in a barn near Devon, and the Order held a silent vigil. Lily sat alone in the corner of Grimmauld Place, eyes wide but tearless. Sirius had raged that night. He wanted revenge, everyone did. Moody had even taught a select group how to cast the Cruciatus, arguing that desperate times called for desperate measures. But Lily never attended those sessions. She didn't judge others for doing what they felt they had to do. She understood desperation. She carried it in her womb, wrapped in the hope that the child inside her would live to see a better world. But she also believed that crossing that line, using the unforgivable curses, would leave a scar that no war could justify. Her defiance wasn't loud, but it was resolute. Dumbledore recognized this quality in her and trusted her with missions that required subtlety and mercy. When Severus Snape, then a half-repentant Death Eater, came to beg for Dumbledore's help in protecting the Potters, it was Lily who agreed to meet him in secret without telling James. She didn't forgive him, not fully, but she listened. She believed in redemption, even if she never allowed herself to forget the cost of betrayal. Her ability to resist the pull of vengeance was perhaps most remarkable given her personal loss. In early 1980, her childhood friend Mary MacDonald was found barely alive after being tortured with the Cruciatus curse by Bellatrix Lestrange. Mary would never walk again without aid. Lily sat by her bedside for weeks, reading to her, tending to her wounds. And yet, when Bellatrix was spotted in Knockturn Alley 2 months later, Lily did not pursue her with bloodlust. She reported the sighting, organized a surveillance watch, and advised the Order to avoid rash action. It infuriated Sirius. It confused even Frank Longbottom, but Lily understood something many others did not, that the war would be won not just by courage, but by conscience. It would be too easy to mistake her pacifism for naivete. That would be a grave error. She was the same Lily who hexed Mulciber into the hospital wing when he tried to force a Slytherin girl into a closet with Imperius. She was the same Lily who, in her 7th year, devised a protective charm so complex that Flitwick had her teach it to advanced students. She was never passive, but she was always principled. The magic she wielded was steeped in intention. When she cursed, it was to protect, not to destroy. When she fought, it was with clarity, not hatred. That distinction, while subtle, saved her soul. And in the end, it gave her magic the power to do something the unforgivable curses never could, create a shield strong enough to repel death itself. The protective charm she cast over Harry that night in Godric's Hollow, born not of dark magic, but of selfless love, would go on to define the fate of the wizarding world. Voldemort, with all his mastery of dark arts, could never understand it. There's a strange poetry in that truth, that the most powerful defense in the entire series came not from an elder wand or a hex or an ancient incantation, but from a woman who refused to use the darkest spells, even when they might have avenged her friends, even when they might have spared her. It is telling that in all the chaos of those final years, of battles and betrayals, of secret safe houses and hidden pregnancies, no one ever accused Lily of cowardice. They called her brave, they called her fierce, but above all they called her good, not perfect, not saintly, but good in the way that meant something, in the way that left a mark deeper than a curse. One of the most haunting omissions in the film adaptations is the nuance of Lily's resistance. The movies show her as a mother, a victim, a symbol, but they do not show her as a warrior of conscience. They do not show the internal battles she fought. Every time she saw a friend fall, every time she looked at the headlines screaming about another massacre. She had the knowledge, she had the skill, but she never surrendered to darkness. In the books, Harry inherits more than his mother's eyes. He inherits her heart. When he faces Bellatrix in the Department of Mysteries, he tries and fails to cast the Cruciatus curse. "You have to mean it," Bellatrix tells him, laughing. He didn't. He couldn't. And in that moment, he echoed Lily's legacy. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong in the same quiet, unwavering way. Later, when Harry disarms Draco instead of killing him, when he walks into the Forbidden Forest to face death without striking first, we see again the shadow of Lily's moral clarity, her refusal to dehumanize the enemy, her belief that compassion, even when it hurts, is more powerful than vengeance. Kingsley Shacklebolt once described her as the kind of witch who made you believe the war might end one day, not because we'd killed all the Death Eaters, but because someone like her would still be alive to raise a child. And though she didn't live, her choice lived on, in Harry, in the Resistance, in every small act of mercy the Order committed when they could have chosen wrath. The unforgivable curses require intent, hatred, the stripping away of empathy. Lily understood that. She could recite the incantations, she could describe the wand movements, but she never gave them her soul. That refusal, more than any duel, more than any victory, is what made her extraordinary. Not all wars are won by killing the enemy. Some are won by refusing to become them. Lily Evans Potter was never honoured with a statue, never given a title. But she was remembered in the eyes of her son, in the courage of her friends, and in the hush that fell whenever her name was spoken. For in a time when others answered darkness with darkness, she remained the light.